Wimbledon FC, 1988 to 2000. Before MMA was mainstream, these guys were practicing it in pre-season training. Wimbledon FC didn't just play football, they declared war on everyone who thought they were too posh for the sport. The Crazy Gang became commonly associated with Wimbledon as a result of the often cheeky and boisterously macho behaviour of their players, who were in the habit of playing frequent and outrageous practical jokes on each other. We're talking about initiation rituals that would make Marine boot camp look like summer camp, belongings being set on fire, players being tied to the roof of a car at the training ground and driven at high speeds along the A3. But the pranks had a darker edge. Dave Besant revealed how his crash helmet would get filled with talcum powder and other substances. Vinnie Jones, the future Hollywood hardman and Wimbledon captain, described watching John Fashanu throw new recruits around like a rag doll. Dennis Wise was out here making grown men cry in training. This wasn't just team bonding, it was systematic intimidation that extended to opponents too. They'd create hostile dressing room atmospheres, keeping visitors' facilities cold, unkempt, even removing toilet paper to unsettle teams before matches. The playing style? Fearless long ball merchants who treated fancy footwork like a foreign language. There was a swagger about them on the pitch, a confidence about how they were in the dressing room and how they approached the game. Gary Lineker once said, "The best way to watch Wimbledon is on CFAX," which was basically the 80s version of saying your football was so ugly, people preferred reading about it. But here's the thing, it worked. They somehow won the 1988 FA Cup against Liverpool. The Crazy Gang nickname was coined at the final whistle, when BBC commentator John Motson declared that the Crazy Gang have beaten the Culture Club. Imagine being so chaotic that beating one of England's greatest teams gets treated like a comedy sketch. Yet they finished 7th in the league that year, 6th the year before, and maintained top 10 finishes throughout the early 1990s, before relegation finally came in 2000.
The original Wimbledon FC no longer exist. They moved to Milton Keynes and became MK Dons, which is basically football's equivalent of your ex moving to another city and pretending you never happened. But the fans created AFC Wimbledon, and after 22 years of clawing their way back up from the 9th tier, they've just earned promotion to League One for 2025-26. It's the ultimate redemption story. The Crazy Gang might be gone, but their spirit lives on through the most stubborn fan base in football history.
Stoke City, 2008 to 2013. Tony Pulis built a team around one man's ability to launch a football like it was a medieval siege weapon, and honestly, it was beautiful in the most simple way possible. Delap's throws, noted by Martin O'Neill as equivalent to a corner or a free kick, often ranged 30 to 40 metres and could reach the speed of 60 km/h. Rory Delap became the most feared man on any sideline, not because he could dribble or pass, but because he could literally throw a ball harder than most people could kick it. Of their first 13 goals, 7 were credited as Delap assists in their debut Premier League season. Teams were so terrified of his throws they'd rather give away corners. Arsenal's Arsene Wenger got so frustrated he suggested changing the rules. It is a little bit of an unfair advantage. He is using a strength that is usually not a strength in football. Wenger literally wanted to replace throw-ins with kick-ins because he couldn't handle being beaten by a guy picking up a ball with his hands. The Britannia Stadium became a house of horrors for visiting teams. The windy conditions, combined with supporters who broke decibel records, made it a truly unnerving away day. Pulis deliberately narrowed the pitch to Premier League minimum width, just to make Delap's throws more devastating. West Ham tried to get clever, moving the advertising boards right to the sideline to kill Delap's run-up. Beautiful plan, terrible execution. The first throw Delap took came from behind the board itself, and it still ended in a goal. Sometimes football's funniest moments come when tactical masterminds outsmart themselves. "Can you do it on a cold, rainy night in Stoke?" became the ultimate Premier League meme, and honestly, it was a fair question because most teams couldn't. According to Stats Perform data, Delap directly assisted on 5 Premier League goals from throw-ins, and Stoke City as a whole have scored 24 goals from those situations. After just one defeat against Bolton on the opening day of the 2008-09 season, bookmaker Paddy Power paid out early on Stoke's relegation bets, which became the most embarrassing moment in gambling history when Stoke finished a comfortable 12th in their first Premier League campaign in 23 years. Stoke City keep finding themselves stuck in championship purgatory, finishing 18th in 2024-25 and barely avoiding relegation. Turns out when you can't throw your way to victory anymore, you actually actually need to play football. They're basically the poster child for what happens when your entire identity is built around one gimmick. At least the memes are eternal. Portsmouth, 2006 to 2010. Harry Redknapp decided to turn Portsmouth into footballing billionaires and nearly broke the entire sport in the process. This was financial madness disguised as tactical genius. Sol Campbell, Jermaine Defoe, Lassana Diarra, Glenn Johnson, big names on massive wages at a club that had been fighting relegation just seasons earlier. With large amounts of money available for Redknapp to make record signings, the club finished the 2006-07 season in the top half of the table for the first time since their promotion. Then came the 2008 FA Cup final, the greatest moment in Portsmouth's modern history. They shocked Manchester United in the quarter-finals, beat West Bromwich Albion at Wembley in the semis, and Nwankwo Kanu scored the winner against Cardiff City in the final. But here's where it gets weird. The FA Cup win triggered European football, which meant even more spending. Overspending on wages and transfers resulted in Pompey racking up pre-tax losses of £16.7 million in the 21 months between June 2008 and February 2010. Redknapp left for Tottenham 5 months after lifting the trophy, and the whole house of cards collapsed. Portsmouth went into administration twice and got relegated 3 times in 4 seasons, dropping down to League Two in one of the most spectacular financial implosions in football history. They spent themselves into oblivion chasing the dream of sustained European competition. If you asked 100 Portsmouth fans if they think the glory of winning the FA Cup was worth it, one wonders how many would say yes. Portsmouth are back in the Championship for 2024-25 after winning League One as champions. The long road back teaches you lessons the fast track never could. They'll face Southampton in the Championship after the Saints got relegated from the Premier League. From financial ruin to facing their biggest rivals once again. Leeds United, 1999 to 2004. David O'Leary assembled the most expensive group of teenagers in football history and nearly conquered Europe before reality came knocking like an angry debt collector. The babies of Leeds reached the Champions League semi-finals with a squad so young they probably still needed permission slips for away trips. Leeds reached the semi-finals of the Champions League in 2001, where they lost to eventual runners-up Valencia. Rio Ferdinand, Harry Kewell, Alan Smith, Mark Viduka, Lee Bowyer, Jonathan Woodgate. This wasn't just a team, it was a generational talent factory. O'Leary had spent almost £100 million on new players in less than 4 years for no reward in terms of trophies, but he had never finished outside the top 5. Chairman Peter Ridsdale had borrowed £60 million against future gate receipts, budgeting for prolonged Champions League involvement, except the Champions League involvement lasted exactly 1 semi-final run. When Leeds finished 5th in 2002, missing out on Champions League qualification again, the financial reality hit like a freight train. Leeds players were asked to defer wages, the fire sale began, and O'Leary was sacked after releasing a controversial book, Leeds United on Trial, that basically threw his own players under the bus. Their fall from grace led to the phrase, doing a Leeds, meaning spending money you don't have on dreams that might not come true. They went from Champions League semi-finalists to relegated from the Premier League in 3 seasons, then fell into League One 3 years later. A team of young talented players was torn apart as the club went from European elite to the 3rd tier. They did make it back to the Premier League in 2020, their first return in 16 years, but lasted just 1 season before getting relegated again in 2021. Today, Leeds are finally back where they belong. They won the Championship in 2024-25 and returned to the Premier League for the 25-26 season. After 16 years in the wilderness, they've learned that sustainable success beats flashy spending sprees. Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom to remember who you actually are. Swansea City, 2011 to 2014. A Welsh club decided to play like Barcelona and somehow made it work. This was Swanzalona, the most unlikely marriage of philosophy and geography in Premier League history. Swansea were supposed to hoof the ball and hope for the best. Instead, they passed it around like they were auditioning for Pep Guardiola. Brendan Rodgers, then Michael Laudrup, brought Spanish football to South Wales, and it was mesmerising. Michu appeared out of nowhere, scored 22 goals in his debut season, then basically vanished like he was some sort of footballing magician who ran out of tricks.
The 2013 League Cup win proved that newly promoted clubs could thrive playing beautiful football. Not just by grinding out results, Leon Britton averaged more passes per game than most Premier League midfields managed collectively. Ashley Williams captained like he'd been reading tactical manuals written in Spanish. This was proof that football intelligence could overcome financial disadvantage and that style didn't have to be sacrificed for substance. Swansea are back in the Championship, sitting mid-table and occasionally remembering they used to play the most beautiful football in the Premier League. They're proof that you can temporarily punch above your weight with the right philosophy, but sustaining it requires more than just pretty passing. The magic might have faded, but at least they gave us a few seasons of pure football poetry.
Queen's Park Rangers, 2010 to 2012. Neil Warnock assembled the most expensive relegation battle in Premier League history and somehow made it entertaining. QPR's wage bill was bigger than their league position made sense. Joey Barton, Sean Wright-Phillips, Jibril Cisse, big names on massive wages fighting for their Premier League lives, while Warnock stood on the sideline looking like he was personally offended by the concept of football tactics. The madness peaked when they helped Manchester City win their first Premier League title by basically refusing to defend properly on the final day. Sergio Aguero's legendary winner came against QPR, who were too busy trying not to get relegated they panicked when having the ball. Warnock's press conferences were entertainment in themselves. He'd call out players, referees, and probably the weather if it affected his team's performance. This was a manager who treated every match like a personal vendetta and every result like either vindication or conspiracy. Today, QPR are in the Championship, eternally stuck between being too good for League One and not quite good enough for the Premier League. They're football's equivalent of that friend who peaked in high school but keeps showing up to reunions talking about their glory days. At least they can always say they helped create one of football's most iconic moments.
Middlesbrough, 2016-2017. Aitor Karanka took Middlesbrough from Championship to the Premier League and decided the best way to stay up was to basically refuse to play football. Middlesbrough's 2016-17 season was an exercise in extreme minimalism. They defended like their lives depended on it and attacked like they were afraid of embarrassing the opposition. Alvaro Negredo was carrying them alone up front, while Victor Valdez stood in goal, probably wondering how he'd gone from Barcelona to this defensive monastery. Karanka walked out of training after arguments with players and almost resigned mid-season, which would have been the perfect metaphor for a team that seemed to be having an existential crisis about whether they actually wanted to score goals. This was football reduced to its mathematical minimum. Possession was optional, creativity was discouraged, and entertainment was completely accidental. The approach led to relegation, with just 28 points from 38 matches, scoring only 27 goals while conceding 53, and Karanka's ultra-defensive philosophy ultimately cost him his job mid-season. Middlesbrough have found their lane in the Championship, and manager Michael Carrick has somehow turned them into the most confusing team in football. They've gone from refusing to attack to attacking beautifully, but forgetting how to defend.
Leicester City, 2015-2016, the team that broke mathematics. Bookmakers had given Leicester City odds of 5,000 to 1 to win the league. Leicester will stand as one of the all-time sporting miracles, made all the more improbable by the club's relatively puny stature. Jamie Vardy went from non-league football to breaking Premier League records. On 28 November 2015, Leicester striker Jamie Vardy set a new record by scoring in 11 consecutive matches with his goal against Manchester United, surpassing Ruud van Nistelrooy's Premier League record. Riyad Mahrez cost £400,000 from Le Havre and became the best player in the league. N'Golo Kante was an unknown French midfielder who basically ran more than the entire rest of the Premier League combined. But get this, Manchester United rejects were everywhere. Danny Drinkwater, released by United as a teenager, became Leicester's midfield metronome. Danny Simpson, dumped by United after barely playing, turned into their rock-solid right-back. Richie Delette, another United cast-off, was also a part of their title-winning squad. It's like United accidentally gave away the pieces of a championship puzzle, and Leicester put it together while laughing all the way to the trophy ceremony. They won the league by giving the ball away and counter-attacking like their lives depended on it. Claudio Ranieri fed his players pizza after clean sheets and watched them demolish the established order. Leicester's points jump of 40 from 2014-15 to 2015-16 remains the second highest leap ever seen in the competition. They went from relegation candidates to champions with basically the same squad. Gary
Lineker, the former Leicester striker who led a consortium that saved the club from administration in 2002, had said he would host the BBC football show Match of the Day in his underwear if Leicester won the title. "You could have given me 10 million to 1 and I'd have said, nah, it's a waste of a quid." After they won the title, he did indeed present the show clad only in boxer shorts. This wasn't just an upset, it was a complete rewriting of what we thought was possible in modern football. In a season which has defied belief, Leicester has shrugged off the challenge of Tottenham Hotspur, Arsenal and Manchester City to become the most unlikely champion in Premier League history. Leicester are back in the Championship after getting relegated in 2025, proving that even miracles have expiration dates. But here's the thing, they had their moment of pure magic, and no amount of relegation can take that away. Sometimes the best stories are about clubs that decided to do things completely differently and somehow made it work. That's the beautiful madness of the Premier League, where the impossible happens just often enough to keep us all believing in miracles. If you enjoyed this dive into football's most gloriously unhinged stories, make sure to subscribe, because honestly, English football's weirdest chapters are still to be written.